The rider came into Hangtown, California, on a dusty Thursday afternoon in June of 1873, and Hannah Zimmerman knew from the moment she saw him that her carefully ordered life was about to change forever. She was hanging laundry behind the whitewashed church when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the main road. The stranger sat tall in his saddle, a lean figure silhouetted against the bright Sierra Nevada sky, his hat pulled low over his face. Even from a distance, there was something about the way he carried himself that made her heart skip in a way she had never experienced before. She pressed a damp sheet against her chest, watching as he guided his horse toward the saloon with the easy confidence of a man who belonged nowhere and everywhere all at once. "Hannah!" Her father's voice rang out from the church doorway. "Those linens will not hang themselves, and we have evening prayers to prepare for." She turned quickly, her cheeks flushing as if Reverend Joseph Zimmerman could somehow read her thoughts. "Yes, Father, I am nearly finished." He studied her for a moment with those sharp gray eyes that could pierce straight through to a person's soul, or so the congregation often said. At 52, Joseph Zimmerman was a pillar of righteousness in Hangtown, a gold rush settlement that had grown from a rough mining camp into something resembling civilization. He had arrived 10 years earlier with Hannah's mother, determined to bring salvation to the frontier. When cholera took his wife 5 years ago, he had poured all his grief and devotion into two things: his ministry and his daughter. "Remember that we are having the Hendersons for supper tonight," he said. "Mrs. Henderson is bringing her famous preserves, and I expect you to be presentable." Hannah nodded dutifully, though her stomach tightened at the mention of the Hendersons. Their son, Albert, had been paying increasingly obvious attention to her after Sunday services, and she knew her father looked favorably on the match. Albert was respectable, reliable, and thoroughly devoted to the church. He was also utterly incapable of making her feel anything beyond mild appreciation for his good manners. As her father retreated into the church, Hannah turned back to her task, but her eyes drifted once more toward the main street. The stranger had dismounted and was tying his horse to the hitching post outside the Gilded Nugget Saloon. Something made him pause and look in her direction, and though the distance was too great to see his features clearly, she felt the weight of his gaze as surely as if he stood beside her. She fumbled with the clothespin in her hand, dropping it into the grass. When she looked up again, he had disappeared into the saloon, but the impression of that moment lingered like heat lightning on a summer night. Hannah finished her work with unusual haste and retreated into the small house that adjoined the church. The parsonage was simple but comfortable, with lace curtains her mother had sewn years ago and a well-worn Bible on every available surface. She changed into her better dress, a modest blue calico that her father approved of, and set about preparing supper. The Hendersons arrived promptly at 6, as they always did. Albert held the door for his mother, who swept in with her preserves, and an abundance of opinions about the state of the town's moral fiber. "I heard that dreadful establishment on Main Street has hired another entertainer, Mrs. Henderson announced, settling her considerable frame into the best chair. "A woman of questionable virtue, I am told. Really, Reverend, something must be done about the influences corrupting our young people." Hannah's father nodded gravely as he carved the roast. "I share your concerns, Mrs. Henderson. The battle for souls is never ending in a place like Hangtown." Albert caught Hannah's eye and offered her what he probably thought was a charming smile. He was not an unpleasant-looking man, with his neat brown hair and carefully trimmed beard, but there was something indefinably bland about him, like a glass of water when what you really wanted was something with flavor. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, I was hoping you might accompany me to the Independence Day celebration next week. The Ladies' Auxiliary is organizing a picnic, and it would be my honor to escort you." Before she could formulate a response, her father answered for her. "What a thoughtful invitation, Albert. Hannah would be delighted to attend with you." She forced a smile and murmured her agreement, feeling as though the walls of the small house were closing in around her. This was her life, she reminded herself. This was what good daughters did. They married suitable men and raised children in the faith, and never wondered what it might be like to feel something wild and ungovernable in their hearts. After supper, she excused herself to clear the dishes while the others continued their conversation in the parlor. Through the open window above the sink, she could hear music drifting from the saloon, a lively piano tune punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. Her father often preached against the evils of such establishments, but in that moment, Hannah felt an unexpected longing to know what it was like inside those walls, where people seemed to find joy without needing permission first. She was wiping the last plate when a knock came at the back door. Startled, she opened it to find old Mr. Chen, who ran the laundry service in town. His face was creased with worry. "Miss Hannah," he said in his careful English, "I am sorry to disturb, but my grandson, he is very sick. Fever very high. Your father, he has medicine, of course." "Wait here, please." She hurried to her father's study, where he kept a small supply of medicines for parishioners in need. She was searching through the cabinet when she overheard Mrs. Henderson's voice from the parlor. "I saw that Chinese man approaching the house." "Really, Reverend, I know you believe in Christian charity, but one must be careful about encouraging such people. They have their own ways and their own gods." Hannah's hand stilled on the bottle of willow bark tincture. She waited to hear her father's response. "The Lord calls us to minister to all His children, Mrs. Henderson," he said, though his tone was more diplomatic than forceful. "However, I do understand your concerns about maintaining appropriate boundaries." It was not the firm rebuke she had hoped for, and something inside her hardened slightly. She collected the medicine along with a jar of honey and returned to the back door. "Tell your grandson to take a spoonful of this 3 times daily," she instructed Mr. Chen, pressing the bottles into his weathered hands. "And the honey will help soothe his throat. If the fever does not break by tomorrow evening, please come find me, and I will see what more can be done." The old man's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "You are very kind, Miss Hannah, very kind. Your mother, she would be proud." After he left, Hannah stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing in the cool evening air. The sky had deepened to indigo, and stars were beginning to emerge like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, wild and free. The next morning, Hannah rose before dawn, as she always did, to help her father prepare for the day. She made breakfast, swept the church, and arranged fresh wildflowers on the altar. By the time the morning sun had burned off the night chill, she was ready for her weekly trip to the general store. Hangtown's main street was already bustling with activity. Miners fresh from the diggings rubbed shoulders with merchants and farmers. A stage-coach rattled past, kicking up clouds of dust. Hannah nodded to the people she passed, receiving respectful greetings in return. Everyone knew the preacher's daughter, and everyone expected her to maintain the highest standards of deportment. She was nearly to the store when she saw him again. The stranger was leaning against the post outside the assay office, one boot propped behind him, his hat tipped back to reveal dark hair, and a face that could have been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the Sierra Peaks. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with the kind of weathered look that came from years spent under an open sky. As she approached, he straightened, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of slate in winter. "Morning, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough around the edges, like whiskey poured over gravel. Hannah knew she should simply nod and continue on her way, but instead she found herself stopping. "Good morning," she replied, then immediately felt foolish for engaging with a stranger. "Are you new to Hangtown?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Just passing through. Name's Mason Wells. I'm looking for work, actually. Know anyone who might be hiring?" "The mines are always looking for men," she offered. "Or perhaps one of the ranches outside town." "I was thinking something a bit different. I'm handy with carpentry, blacksmithing, that sort of thing. Heard your church might need some repairs." Hannah blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" "Noticed the bell towers listing a bit to the left when I rode in yesterday. And the front steps look like they could use reinforcing before someone takes a tumble." She had been after her father for months to hire someone to fix exactly those problems, but he kept insisting they could not afford it. "You would need to speak with my father, Reverend Zimmerman." "I am his daughter, Hannah. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Zimmerman." The way he said her name made it sound like something more interesting than it had ever been before. "I will stop by the church this afternoon, if that suits." "I am sure my father will appreciate your offer, Mr. Wells." She should have ended the conversation there and continued to the store, but she hesitated, caught by the intensity of his gaze. Up close, she could see he had a small scar above his left eyebrow and that his hands bore the calluses of hard work. There was something both dangerous and honest about him, a combination that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I should be going," she finally said, though she made no move to leave. "Of course, I have kept you long enough." He touched his hat again, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "I hope I will see you again, Miss Zimmerman." She hurried away before she could say something foolish, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the store, Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, gave her a knowing look. "I saw you talking to that handsome stranger," she said in a low voice as she measured out flour. "Be careful, dear. Men like that are nothing but trouble for respectable young ladies." "I was merely being polite," Hannah protested, feeling her cheeks heat. "He is looking for work. Mmm. Mrs. Patterson did not sound convinced. "Well, you just remember who you are and where you come from. Your father has worked too hard to build his reputation for you to risk it on a passing fancy." The words stung, partly because they echoed Hannah's own thoughts, and partly because she resented being reminded of her duty. She completed her purchases quickly and made her way home, where she threw herself into the endless tasks that filled her days. But throughout the morning, as she kneaded bread dough and mended her father's shirts, her mind kept drifting back to Mason Wells. She wondered where he came from, what had brought him to Hangtown, and what it would be like to be the kind of woman who could freely talk to such a man without worrying about reputation and propriety. Shortly after lunch, a knock came at the front door. Hannah opened it to find Mason standing on the porch, hat in hand. In the full daylight, he was even more striking than she had realized, with strong features that suggested both strength and gentleness. "I hope I am not calling at an inconvenient time," he said. "I wanted to speak with Reverend Zimmerman about the repair work. Please, come in. I will fetch my father." She showed him into the modest parlor and went to find her father in his study. When she told him about Mason's offer, his bushy eyebrows drew together in thought. "A wandering cowboy looking for carpentry work," he mused. "What do we know about this man?" "Nothing, father, except that he has a good eye for needed repairs and seems willing to work for fair wages." Her father studied her for a long moment, and she kept her expression carefully neutral. Finally, he rose from his desk. "Very well, I will hear what he has to say." Hannah returned to the kitchen, but she left the door slightly ajar so she could hear the conversation in the next room. Mason's voice carried clearly as he outlined what repairs the church needed, and quoted reasonable prices for materials and labor. Her father, predictably, tried to negotiate down, but Mason held firm in a way that was respectful but unyielding. "Reverend," he said at one point, "I understand budgets are tight, but if you cut corners on materials, you will just have to pay for repairs again in a year or two. Sometimes it is worth spending a bit more to do the job right the first time." There was a long pause, and then her father said, "You make a fair point, Mr. Wells. Very well, I accept your terms. When can you begin?" "Tomorrow morning, if that suits you." They shook hands, and Hannah quickly busied herself with stirring a pot on the stove so she would not appear to have been eavesdropping. She heard Mason's boots on the wooden floor and his polite farewell, then the front door closing. Her father appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Well, we shall see if this Mason Wells is as good as his word. Though I confess, there is something about him that troubles me. He has the look of a man with a past." "Everyone has a past, father," Hannah said quietly. "Yes, but some pasts are more troubling than others. I want you to keep your distance while he is working here. It would not be appropriate for you to spend time alone with him." Hannah felt a flash of rebellion but suppressed it. "Of course, father." The next morning, Mason arrived just as the sun was rising, a wagon full of lumber and tools behind his horse. Hannah watched from the kitchen window as he unloaded his supplies, moving with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. Her father made a brief appearance to point out what needed to be done, then retreated to his study to work on Sunday's sermon. By mid-morning, the sound of hammering and sawing filled the air. Hannah tried to focus on her chores, but she found herself repeatedly drawn to the windows. Once, she caught Mason looking toward the house and he raised a hand in greeting. She ducked back quickly, embarrassed to be caught watching. At noon, she prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold chicken. On impulse, she made a second plate and carried it outside to where Mason was working on the front steps. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, trying to sound casual. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "That is very kind of you, Miss Zimmerman. I was just thinking it might be time for a break." He set down his tools and took the plate, settling himself on the church steps to eat. Hannah knew she should return to the house, but instead, she found herself sitting on the opposite end of the steps, maintaining a proper distance. "How long have you been doing carpentry work?" she asked. "My father taught me when I was a boy," he replied between bites. "He was a builder back in Missouri. I worked with him until I was 17, then struck out on my own. That was 8 years ago." He gave her a sideways glance, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Are you asking my age, Miss Zimmerman?" She felt her face flush. "I was merely making conversation. I am 25, and before you ask, no, I am not married, never have been, and no, there is not anyone waiting for me anywhere. I move around too much for that." "I was not going to ask," she protested, though of course she had been wondering exactly that. Hum. He did not sound convinced, which reminded her uncomfortably of Mrs. Patterson the day before. "What about you? I notice you do not wear a ring, but in my experience, pretty young women in small towns are usually spoken for." The compliment, delivered so casually, made her heart skip. "I am not married, no, though there are expectations." "Albert Henderson," she stared at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "Small town, people talk, and I saw the way he looked at you when you walked past the assay office earlier." Hannah had not even noticed Albert, which said more than she wanted to admit. "He is a good man. My father approves of him." "That is not what I asked." The bluntness of his observation caught her off guard. "It does not matter what I want. I have responsibilities. a duty to my father and to the church. Mason was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. That is a heavy burden for one person to carry. It is the burden I was given. She stood abruptly, suddenly uncomfortable with how much she had revealed. I should get back to my work. Please leave the plate on the steps when you are finished. She hurried inside before he could respond, her pulse racing. What was she doing, having such a conversation with a man she barely knew? Her father would be appalled if he knew. For the rest of the day, she avoided the windows and tried to focus on her tasks. But that evening, when she retrieved the plate from the front steps, she found a small wildflower laid across it, a delicate yellow bloom that grew in the meadows outside town. There was no note, no explanation, just that single flower. Hannah pressed it between the pages of her Bible that night, knowing it was foolish but unable to stop herself. Over the next week, Mason worked steadily on the church repairs. He arrived early each morning and often worked until dusk, pausing only for the lunch Hannah brought him. Her father was pleased with the quality of his work, though he maintained his suspicions about Mason's character. A man who wanders alone usually has a reason, he told Hannah one evening. Either he is running from something or searching for something he will never find. Neither makes for a stable, godly life. Despite her father's warnings, Hannah found herself looking forward to the brief moments she could spend talking with Mason during his lunch breaks. He had a way of listening that made her feel heard in a way she never had before, and he shared bits and pieces of his own story. He had grown up in Missouri, left home after his father died, and spent the last 8 years drifting from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "Why?" she asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade of an oak tree near the church. "Why not settle somewhere?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "When I was 17, I fell in love with a girl in my hometown. Sarah was her name. We planned to get married, start a family. Then she got sick, some kind of fever. She died within a week, and I could not stand to stay in that town anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw her ghost. So I left, and I just kept leaving. It became a habit, I suppose." The rawness in his voice made Hannah's throat tighten. "I am so sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "But lately, I have been thinking that maybe I have been running for too long. Maybe it is time to stop." The air between them felt charged, electric. Hannah knew she should make an excuse and leave, but she could not seem to move. "Hannah," her father's voice rang out from the church doorway, "I need your help preparing for the evening service." The spell broke. Hannah jumped to her feet, smoothing her skirts. "I have to go." Mason nodded, but his eyes never left her face. "Of course." As she hurried away, she could feel his gaze following her, a warmth that lingered long after she had disappeared into the church. That Sunday, the church was packed for the Independence Day service. Hannah sat in her usual place in the front pew, acutely aware that Mason had slipped into a seat in the back row. She tried to focus on her father's sermon about freedom and responsibility, but her attention kept drifting to the tall figure in the back. After the service, the congregation gathered outside for the picnic. Albert appeared at Hannah's side almost immediately, offering his arm to escort her to the celebration. She accepted because refusing would have caused a scene, but her heart was not in it. The ladies' auxiliary had outdone themselves, setting up tables laden with food in the shade of the cottonwood trees. Children ran laughing through the grass, while men gathered in groups to discuss politics and business. Hannah helped serve food, smiled at all the right moments, and tried not to watch Mason, who stood slightly apart from the crowd, looking like he did not quite belong. "Your father tells me that Drifter has been doing work on the church," Albert said, following her gaze. I hope Reverend Zimmerman is being careful. Men like that cannot be trusted. What do you mean, men like that? Hannah asked, hearing an edge in her own voice. Albert looked surprised at her tone. Why wanderers? Men without roots or responsibilities. They are unreliable by nature. Perhaps they are simply men who have not yet found a place worth staying for, she replied. Before Albert could respond, there was a commotion near the main road. A group of rough-looking miners had arrived, already drunk despite the early hour. They made their way toward the picnic, loud and belligerent. Well, one of them called out, looks like the holy folks are having a party. How about sharing some of that food with working men? Hannah's father stepped forward, his expression stern but not unkind. You are welcome to join us if you can conduct yourselves with appropriate decorum. This is a family gathering. The apparent leader of the group, a big man with a red face and mean eyes, laughed. Decorum. Hear that, boys? The preacher wants decorum. He staggered closer, and Hannah could smell the whiskey on him from several feet away. Maybe I do not feel like being decent. Maybe I feel like having some fun. The crowd had gone quiet, parents pulling their children closer. Albert had gone pale, making no move to intervene. But before anyone could respond, Mason stepped forward. I think you boys should move along, he said quietly. There was no aggression in his tone, but there was something unmistakably dangerous in his stance. The drunk miner looked Mason up and down. And who are you to tell us what to do? Someone who does not want to see this nice picnic ruined. There is a saloon just down the street where you will be more comfortable. I suggest you head there. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then one of the other miners tugged on his friend's sleeve. Come on, Jake. It is too hot for this. Let us just go. With some grumbling, the group finally moved on. The tension drained from the crowd, replaced by nervous laughter and relief. Hannah's father approached Mason, extending his hand. Thank you, Mr. Wells. That could have become very unpleasant. Just doing what needed to be done, Reverend. Hannah caught Mason's eye across the crowd, and he gave her a small nod before disappearing back into the edges of the gathering. Her heart was pounding, not from fear of the miners but from something else entirely, something that felt like recognition and longing all mixed together. The picnic continued without further incident, but Hannah found it increasingly difficult to focus on Albert's droning conversation about crop yields and market prices. When he excused himself to join a group of other young men, she took the opportunity to slip away. She found Mason sitting on a low stone wall at the edge of the celebration, watching the festivities with a slightly melancholy expression. You should not be sitting out here alone, she said, approaching him. You are a hero. You should be enjoying the celebration. He looked up at her, a sad smile playing at his lips. I do not feel much like a hero, just a man who has seen enough trouble to know how to spot it coming. May I sit with you? He hesitated, glancing toward the crowd. Your father might not approve, or that Albert fellow. They are both occupied at the moment. She sat down before she could talk herself out of it, leaving a respectable distance between them. Besides, I wanted to thank you for what you did. Those men could have hurt someone. They were more bluster than substance, but yes, it could have turned ugly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play. Hannah felt more at ease than she had all day, a realization that both thrilled and terrified her. Mr. Wells, she began, then stopped. You can call me Mason, he said gently. I think we know each other well enough for that by now. Mason, then, can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really come to Hangtown? There must be dozens of towns between here and wherever you started from. What made you stop here? He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, honestly, I do not know. Something about this place just felt different, like maybe it was where I was supposed to be. He turned to look at her directly. And then I met you, and I started to think that maybe my instincts were right. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Mason, we barely know each other. I know, and I know I have no right to say things like that to you. I know you are the preacher's daughter, and I am just a wanderer with nothing to offer. I know there is that Albert fellow who probably has your father's blessing. But Hannah, I have been alive for 25 years, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. She should have been shocked. She should have reminded him that such declarations were inappropriate. Instead, she found herself saying, "How do you feel about me?" Like I have been walking in darkness for 8 years, and you are the first light I have seen. The words hung between them, beautiful and terrifying. Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of finally hearing someone express what she had been feeling but could not name. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Because when I finish the church repairs in a few days, I will be moving on. That is what I do. But I wanted you to know that meeting you changed something in me. You made me want things I thought I had given up on. Then do not leave." The words came out before she could stop them. "Stay in Hangtown. Find work here. Give yourself a chance to stop running. Hannah, even if I stayed, what future could we have? Your father would never approve of someone like me. The whole town would talk. I will not let you risk your reputation and your relationship with your father for someone like me." "Should not that be my choice?" Before he could answer, Albert's voice rang out across the lawn. "Hannah, where did you go?" She stood quickly, smoothing her skirts. Mason rose as well, his expression carefully neutral as Albert approached. "There you are," Albert said, slightly out of breath. "I have been looking everywhere for you. Your father wants to begin the singing. Of course, I am coming." She glanced back at Mason, trying to convey everything she could not say aloud. "Thank you again, Mr. Wells, for your help with those men." "It was my pleasure, Miss Zimmerman." As she walked away with Albert, she felt Mason's gaze on her back like a physical touch. Her mind was spinning, her heart in turmoil. Everything she had been taught, everything she believed about duty and propriety, was warring with this new feeling that had taken root inside her. That evening, after the celebration had ended and she had helped clean up, Hannah sat in her room, staring at the pressed flower hidden in her Bible. She thought about Mason's words, about walking in darkness and finding light. She thought about Albert and the safe, predictable life he offered. She thought about her mother who had followed her father across the country to build a new life, and wondered if that had been love or duty or some combination of both. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Hannah," her father's voice. "May I come in?" "Of course." He entered, looking weary. The Independence Day celebration always exhausted him, though he would never admit it. He sat on the edge of her bed, studying her with those keen eyes. "I saw you talking with Mr. Wells this afternoon," he said without preamble. Hannah's heart sank. "He was sitting alone. I was simply being kind." "Hannah, you are 20 years old and you have always been an obedient daughter. I have never had cause to question your judgment, but I need to know, has that man been inappropriate with you in any way?" "No." She was genuinely shocked at the suggestion. "He has been nothing but respectful, Father. He works hard, he is honest, and he helped protect the congregation today." "Why are you so determined to think ill of him?" her father sighed. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is falling in love, and I see it in your eyes when you look at him. And that terrifies me." The blunt acknowledgement of what she had been trying to deny left her speechless for a moment. "Father, let me finish. You are my daughter, my only child. All I want is your happiness and safety. Albert Henderson can offer you both. He comes from a good family, he shares our faith, and he will keep you here in Hangtown where you belong. What can Mason Wells offer? A life of wandering, uncertainty. He will break your heart, Hannah, just as surely as the sun rises. You do not know that, she said quietly. You do not know him at all, and neither do you. That is my point. You have known him for barely a week, and already he has your heart in turmoil. Imagine what damage he could do with more time. Maybe the turmoil is not damage. Maybe it is waking up. Her father looked at her sharply. What does that mean? It means that I have spent my whole life being the perfect preacher's daughter. I go to church. I help the congregation. I smile and nod and never question anything. And it is not that I regret those things, Father, but sometimes I wonder if I have been so busy being who everyone expects me to be that I never figured out who I actually am. You are my daughter. You are a woman of faith. That is who you are. But is it all I am? She met his gaze steadily. Mother followed you to California when everyone said she was mad to do so. She gave up her comfortable life in Philadelphia to come to a rough mining town because she loved you. Was she wrong to do that? That was different. How? How is it different? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Finally, he said, I will pray on this, and I ask that you do the same. Ask God to guide your heart, Hannah. Do not trust your feelings alone. They can be misleading. After he left, Hannah knelt by her bed as she did every night, but the prayers would not come. Instead, she found herself thinking about her mother, who had died when Hannah was 15. She remembered her mother's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she looked at Hannah's father, the quiet strength that had sustained her through the hardships of frontier life. What would you tell me to do? Hannah whispered into the darkness. Would you say to follow my heart or to be sensible? But the only answer was silence. The next morning, Mason was back at work, finishing the repairs to the bell tower. Hannah brought him his lunch as usual, but the easy conversation of previous days felt strained. They were both too aware of what had been said the day before. I have been thinking about what you said, Mason finally ventured, about staying in Hangtown. Hope flared in Hannah's chest. And I want to, more than I can say, but I keep coming back to the same problem. Even if I found permanent work here, even if I proved myself to your father and the town, I could not support a wife. Not properly. I have a little money saved, but not enough to buy land or build a house. It would be years before I could offer you the kind of life you deserve. Maybe I do not need the kind of life everyone thinks I deserve. Maybe I just need a life that feels real. He looked at her intently. You say that now, but reality has a way of crushing romantic notions. I have seen it happen. People fall in love with an idea, and then the hard work of actual life grinds them down until there is nothing left but resentment. You are making a lot of assumptions about my capacity for hard work, Hannah said, feeling a spark of irritation. I have been managing a household since I was 15 years old. I know how to stretch a dollar, how to make a meal from almost nothing, how to handle difficulties. I am not some fragile flower who will wilt at the first sign of trouble. A slow smile spread across his face. No, you are definitely not that. You are probably the strongest person I have ever met, if I am being honest. Then stop trying to protect me from my own choices. Hannah. He reached out as if to take her hand, then thought better of it, letting his own fall back to his side. If we do this, if we pursue this thing between us, there will be consequences. Your father might disown you. The town might shun you. You could lose everything you have known. Or I could gain something I never knew I needed. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A group of riders came down the main street, and even from a distance, Hannah could see the glint of badges on their chests. They pulled up in front of the general store, and the townspeople began to gather. I wonder what that is about, Hannah murmured. They soon found out. One of the lawmen began posting notices on the walls of various buildings. Mason's expression had gone carefully blank, and Hannah felt a stir of unease. "What is it?" "Nothing. Just lawmen. I should get back to work." But his tone had changed, become guarded in a way it had not been before. Hannah wanted to press him, but her father emerged from the church, waving her over. "Hannah, please go to the store and find out what those notices say. The town has a right to know." She obeyed, making her way to where a small crowd had gathered. The notice was printed in bold letters. "Wanted for questioning. James Mason Wells, also known as Mason Wells, age 25, dark hair, gray eyes, approximately 6 feet tall. Last seen in the vicinity of Virginia City, Nevada. Contact U.S. Marshal's office with information." Hannah's blood ran cold. The description fit exactly down to the name. She looked back toward the church and saw that Mason had vanished, his tools left scattered on the ground. "That is the fellow working on the church, is it not?" someone in the crowd said. "The drifter, looks like it. Wonder what he did." "Says wanted for questioning, not wanted for a crime. That is different." But already the damage was done. Hannah could see the suspicion blooming on people's faces, the way they glanced toward the church and back at the poster. She felt sick to her stomach. She returned to her father and told him what the notice said. His face grew stern. "I should have trusted my instincts. A man running from the law, working on our church. What will the congregation think? It says for questioning, Father." "That does not mean he has done anything wrong." "Where there is smoke, there is fire, Hannah. I want you to stay away from him. In fact, stay in the house until we know more about this situation. You cannot just condemn him without knowing the facts." "I can, and I will protect my daughter from a potentially dangerous man. Now go inside." "That is an order, not a request." Hannah had never openly defied her father before, but she found herself on the verge of doing so now. Only the knowledge that causing a scene in front of the gathered townspeople would make things worse kept her from arguing further. She went into the house, but instead of staying there, she slipped out the back door as soon as her father returned to his study. She found Mason at the small boarding house where he had been staying. He was packing his saddlebags when she burst into his room without knocking. "Tell me it is not true," she said breathlessly. "Tell me you are not running from the law." He looked up, and the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. "Hannah, you should not be here. If anyone sees you in my room, your reputation will be destroyed." "I do not care about my reputation right now. I care about the truth. What did you do?" He sat down heavily on the bed, rubbing his face. 3 months ago, I was working on a ranch outside Virginia City. The foreman was a cruel man, liked to take his temper out on the workers, especially the Chinese laborers. One day, I saw him beating one of the workers nearly to death over some imagined slight. I intervened. We fought. He hit his head on a rock and was knocked unconscious. I left before he woke up because I knew no lawman would take my word over his. "So you did not kill him?" "No." I checked before I left. He was breathing, cursing even. But apparently he filed charges against me anyway, claiming I tried to murder him. It is my word against his, and he is a respected member of the community while I am just a drifter. "Then you should stay and fight the charges." "Explain what really happened." "Hannah, I have been on the wrong side of the law enough times to know that the truth does not always matter. What matters is who has more money and more influence. I would lose, and I would end up in prison for trying to do the right thing." "So you are just going to run?" Again, the accusation in her voice made him flinch. "What choice do I have? You could choose to trust that justice will prevail. You could choose to let people who care about you help you. You could choose to stop running and face your problems like the man I thought you were. The man you thought I was," he repeated bitterly. And who was that? Some noble hero who always does the right thing. I am not that man, Hannah. I am just someone who has made a lot of mistakes and is trying to survive in a world that does not care much about people like me. Tears burned in Hannah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I do not need you to be perfect. I just need you to fight. For yourself. For us. For the chance at something better. There is no us, Hannah. There never really could be. I am wanted by the law and you are the preacher's daughter. Those two things do not mix. You are giving up. You are taking the coward's way out. His eyes flashed with anger. You have no idea what it is like out here for someone like me. You have spent your whole life protected by your father's position, by the respect the town has for him. You have never had to worry about where your next meal will come from or whether the law will believe you or throw you in jail, because it is easier than investigating the truth. So do not stand there and call me a coward for doing what I need to do to stay free. The words stung because there was truth in them. Hannah had lived a sheltered life, and she could not really understand what Mason had endured, but she also knew that running solved nothing. You are right, she said quietly. I do not know what it is like to be in your position. But I know that every time you run, you are letting fear win, and I thought you were braver than that. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Hannah, wait. She paused in the doorway but did not turn around. I am sorry, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You deserve better than this, better than me. I hope you find happiness with someone who can give you the life you should have. I do not want the life I should have, she said, still not looking at him. I want the life I could have. There is a difference. She left before he could respond, walking quickly back through the dusty streets. She could feel eyes on her, townspeople watching and wondering why the preacher's daughter had been at the boarding house. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. She was tired of caring what everyone thought. When she arrived home, her father was waiting in the parlor. One look at his face told her he had heard about her visit to Mason's room. How could you? He said, his voice shaking with anger and disappointment. How could you shame yourself and this family by going to that man's room unchaperoned? I needed to hear the truth from him. The truth. The truth is that he is wanted by the law and you have been foolish enough to let yourself become entangled with him. Do you have any idea what this will do to my ministry, to your future? I do not care. The words burst out of her, surprising them both. I am tired of worrying about what everyone else thinks. I am tired of being the perfect daughter, the perfect example. I am 20 years old and I have never made a single choice for myself. That is enough, Hannah. You are overwrought. I am not overwrought. I am finally being honest. Do you even care what I want? Or am I just another piece of your ministry, something to be managed and controlled? Her father looked as if she had struck him. How can you say such things? Everything I have done has been for you. Has it? Or has it been for your image, your reputation? You want me to marry Albert because it will look good, not because it will make me happy. You want me to stay away from Mason because people might talk, not because he has actually done anything wrong. He is wanted by the law. For a crime he says he did not commit, for defending someone weaker. Does that sound like a dangerous criminal to you? Her father was quiet for a long moment, his face rigid. Go to your room, Hannah. I need time to think and pray about this situation. Father, I said go to your room. She obeyed, but only because she could see there was no point in continuing the argument now. In her room, she sat on her bed and finally let the tears fall. Everything was falling apart. Mason was leaving, her father was furious with her, and the whole town was probably already spreading stories about the preacher's scandalous daughter. A tapping at her window startled her. She looked up to see a face pressed against the glass. Mason. Her heart leaped as she quickly opened the window. What are you doing here? If my father sees you, I know. I will be quick." He balanced on the narrow ledge outside her window, holding onto the frame. "I could not leave without telling you that you were right. I have been a coward. I have been running for 8 years and I am tired of it, so I am going to do something different this time." "What do you mean?" "I am going to Virginia City to face the charges. I am going to find witnesses who saw what really happened and clear my name. And if that does not work, I am going to accept the consequences rather than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Relief flooded through her. "I will come with you." "No, absolutely not. You have already risked too much for me." "Mason, I am not asking your permission. I am telling you what I am going to do." "Hannah, listen to me. If you come with me, if you are seen traveling with me, you can never come back here. Your father will never forgive you, and the town will never accept you. You will be cut off from everything you have ever known." "Then that is the price I will pay." She was surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I have spent my whole life being who everyone else wanted me to be. For once I want to choose for myself, and I choose you." He stared at her, emotions warring on his face. "Are you sure? Really, truly sure? Because once we do this, there is no going back." "I have never been more sure of anything." "Then we leave tonight. Pack light and wear your most practical clothes. Meet me at the old mill on the edge of town at midnight. And Hannah, bring your mother's Bible. You might want to have it with you." "I will be there." He started to climb down, then paused. "I love you, Hannah Zimmerman. I probably should not say that yet, but I do. You are the light in my darkness, the reason I want to stop running. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." "I love you too," she whispered, finally giving voice to what she had been feeling all along. "I think I have loved you since the moment you rode into town." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face, then disappeared into the darkness. Hannah closed the window, her heart pounding. She had just agreed to run away with a man wanted by the law, to throw away her reputation and her relationship with her father for an uncertain future. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more alive than she ever had. She waited until the house was quiet, then carefully packed a small bag with her most practical clothing, some money she had saved over the years, and her mother's Bible. She changed into her riding dress and boots, then sat on her bed, waiting for midnight. At 11:45, she crept down the stairs, avoiding the steps that creaked. She paused outside her father's study, where a light still burned. Part of her wanted to go in, to try to explain, to say goodbye properly. But she knew he would try to stop her, and she was afraid her resolve would crumble in the face of his disappointment. Instead, she pulled out a piece of paper and quickly wrote a note. "Dear Father, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I know you will be angry and hurt, and I am sorry for that. But I cannot live my life according to everyone else's expectations anymore. I need to find out who I am when I am not trying to be the perfect preacher's daughter. Mason is a good man who deserves a chance to clear his name, and I am going to help him do that. I do not know when or if I will return to Hangtown, but please know that I love you and that I am grateful for everything you have given me. I hope someday you will understand and forgive me. Your daughter, Hannah." She left the note on the hall table where he would find it in the morning, then slipped out the back door into the night. The walk to the old mill felt endless. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. But finally, she saw the dark outline of the mill against the starry sky and Mason's silhouette waiting beside 2 horses. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Did you think I would not?" "Honestly, I was not sure. I thought maybe you would come to your senses." "This is my senses. This is the most sensible thing I have ever done." He helped her mount one of the horses, and they rode out of Hangtown under cover of darkness. Hannah looked back once at the town that had been her whole world, at the white church steeple rising above the other buildings. Then she turned her face forward and did not look back again. They rode through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Hangtown before sunrise. As the sky began to lighten in the east, they stopped to rest the horses near a small stream. "Are you all right?" Mason asked, studying her face in the growing light. "I am better than all right," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. She was exhausted and anxious about the future, but underneath all that was a sense of rightness, of finally being on the path she was meant to walk. They reached Virginia City 5 days later, dusty and weary from hard riding. It was a sprawling, rough-edged town built on silver wealth, much larger and more chaotic than Hangtown. Hannah found the noise and crowds overwhelming after the relative quiet of her hometown. Mason took her to a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who asked no questions when he paid for a room. "I will take the room across the hall," he told Hannah. "I want to do this properly. When we are married, it will be because you chose me freely, not because circumstances forced your hand." The word "married" sent a thrill through Hannah, even as the reality of their situation pressed down on her. Here she was, hundreds of miles from home, with almost no money and no prospects, trusting her future to a man who might end up in prison. Over the next week, Mason worked to track down the men who had been on the ranch when the incident occurred. Many had moved on, but he finally located 2 Chinese laborers who had witnessed the fight. Through a translator, they confirmed his story. The foreman had been beating one of their friends, and Mason had stopped him. The foreman had attacked Mason with a shovel, and Mason had defended himself. The injury had been an accident, not an attempt at murder. The problem was getting anyone in authority to listen. The U.S. Marshal's office was skeptical of testimony from Chinese witnesses, and the ranch foreman had influential friends. Mason was arrested and held pending a hearing before the territorial judge. Hannah watched helplessly as they took him away in shackles. Mrs. Fletcher patted her hand sympathetically. "Do not lose hope, dear. Truth has a way of coming out eventually." But sitting alone in her room that night, Hannah felt doubt creeping in. What if they did not believe the witnesses? What if Mason was convicted and sent to prison? What would she do then? She opened her mother's Bible, running her fingers over the familiar pages. Inside the front cover, her mother had written a note in her graceful handwriting. "To my dearest Hannah, may you always have the courage to follow where God leads you, even when the path is difficult. Remember that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the choice to trust anyway. With all my love, Mother." Hannah had read those words 100 times, but they took on new meaning now. Her mother had been brave enough to leave everything familiar for an uncertain future with the man she loved. Hannah was doing the same thing, following the same kind of faith. The next morning, she went to the courthouse determined to fight for Mason. She spoke to anyone who would listen, pleading for fairness and justice. Most dismissed her as a naive girl in love, but one young clerk listened thoughtfully. "There is a lawyer in town," he told her quietly. "Name is Theodore Wright. He is known for taking on difficult cases, and he does not much care what people think of him. If anyone can help your fellow, it is him." Hannah found Theodore right in a cluttered office above the post office. He was a short, balding man with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She told him everything, and he listened without interrupting. "The case is difficult," he said when she finished. "Testimony from Chinese witnesses carries little weight in most courts, unfortunately, but there might be another angle. The foreman has a history of violence, and his employer on that ranch has been concerned about his behavior. If I can get the ranch owner to testify that he has had complaints before, that might give us leverage. Can you do that? I can try. It will not be cheap, though. I will need a retainer of $50. Hannah's heart sank. She had barely $30 left. I do not have that much, but I can work to earn it. Please just help him. He is a good man who does not deserve to go to prison for defending someone weaker. Wright studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I must be getting soft in my old age. All right, I will take the case. You can pay me whatever you can now and the rest later. But I want you to understand that I cannot guarantee anything. The system is not designed to be fair to people like your Mason Wells. I understand. But we have to try. Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah worked every odd job she could find to help pay the legal fees. She took in laundry, helped at a restaurant, cleaned houses. Mrs. Fletcher, learning of her situation, offered her meals in exchange for help around the boarding house. It was exhausting work, nothing like the relatively easy life she had known in Hangtown, but Hannah found a certain satisfaction in it. She was providing for herself, fighting for something she believed in, living on her own terms. Meanwhile, Wright worked on building a case. He tracked down the ranch owner and convinced him to testify about the foreman's history of violence. He found other workers who had been at the ranch and were willing to confirm that the foreman was known for his cruelty. Slowly, piece by piece, he built a defense. The hearing finally came on a Thursday morning in late July. The courtroom was packed, word having spread about the unusual case. Hannah sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Mason was brought in. He caught her eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile, but she could see the fear beneath his brave face. The prosecution presented their case first, painting Mason as a violent drifter with no regard for authority. The foreman, recovered from his injuries, testified that Mason had attacked him without provocation, that he was lucky to be alive. Then it was Wright's turn. He called witness after witness, each one chipping away at the foreman's credibility. The ranch owner testified about the complaints he had received. The Chinese workers, through their translator, described what they had seen. Other former employees spoke of the foreman's temper and tendency toward violence. When it was all done, the judge retired to consider his verdict. Hannah and Mason were not allowed to speak, but he reached out and briefly squeezed her hand before the bailiff pulled him away. The wait was agonizing. An hour passed, then 2. Hannah prayed more fervently than she ever had in church, bargaining with God, promising anything if he would just let Mason go free. Finally, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he took his seat and looked down at the papers before him. In the matter of the territory versus James Mason Wells, he began, his voice grave, I have considered all the evidence presented. While I have concerns about Mr. Wells's decision to flee rather than face these charges immediately, I am convinced by the preponderance of evidence that he acted in defense of another person, and that the injury to Mr. Douglas was not inflicted with intent to cause grievous harm. Therefore, I find the defendant not guilty of attempted murder. However, Mr. Wells, I am fining you $25 for leaving the scene and failing to report the incident to authorities. Court is adjourned. Hannah's breath left her in a rush. Not guilty. The words echoed in her mind, beautiful and impossible. Around her, the courtroom erupted into noise, but she barely heard it. All she could see was Mason, his face transformed by relief and joy. Outside the courthouse, they finally had a moment alone. Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You saved me, he said into her hair. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave up everything for me. You are worth it, she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. You brought light to my life, Mason. You made me realize I could be more than what everyone expected. He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes intense. Hannah Zimmerman, I am still a man with almost nothing to my name. I can offer you hard work and uncertainty and a future that will probably be full of struggles. But I can also offer you love, respect, and a life where you can be exactly who you want to be. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married the next day by a justice of the peace, with Mrs. Fletcher and Theodore Wright as witnesses. It was nothing like the wedding Hannah had once imagined she would have, with her father presiding and the whole congregation watching. But as she stood in that plain office, holding Mason's hand and promising to love him for the rest of her life, she felt more joy than she had ever experienced. That night, in their small room at the boarding house, Mason pulled her close. "I want to give you the world, Hannah. I want to build you a house and fill it with everything beautiful. But right now, all I can give you is myself and a promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are worthy," she whispered. "You are brave and kind and honorable. You stopped running. You faced your fears. That is everything I could want." Their first year together was harder than Hannah had imagined. They left Virginia City and made their way to Sacramento, where Mason found work as a carpenter. The pay was modest, and they lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, but they were together, and that made every hardship bearable. Hannah discovered she had a talent for sewing, and she began taking in work, making and mending clothes for the growing city's residents. Between her income and Mason's, they slowly began to build a life together. It was nothing fancy, but it was theirs, earned through their own efforts. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about everything under the sun. Mason told her stories of the places he had been, the things he had seen in his years of wandering. Hannah shared memories of her childhood, of her mother's wisdom and her father's dedication. She still felt a pang of grief when she thought of her father, wondering if he thought of her, if he ever regretted the harsh words they had exchanged. As autumn turned to winter, Hannah realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with both joy and terror. They had so little, and bringing a child into such an uncertain situation seemed irresponsible. But when she told Mason, his face lit up in a way that banished all her doubts. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Hannah, this is the most amazing thing that has ever happened to me." "Well, second most amazing after you agreeing to marry me." He immediately became obsessed with providing for their growing family. He took on extra work, laboring long hours to save money for when the baby came. Hannah worried about him, seeing the exhaustion in his face, but he waved off her concerns. "I want our child to have everything I never did," he told her. "A stable home, parents who love each other, a sense of belonging. I want to give them the world." In early May of 1874, Hannah gave birth to a son. They named him Joseph, after her father, a choice that made Hannah cry as she held the tiny, perfect baby in her arms. "Maybe this is an olive branch," Mason suggested gently. "Maybe when your father hears he has a grandson named after him, it will soften his heart." Hannah had been thinking the same thing. Now that she was a mother herself, she understood more deeply the bond between parent and child. She could not imagine anything that would make her stop loving her son, and she hoped her father felt the same way. A week after Joseph's birth, she wrote a letter to her father. It took her days to find the right words, to express both her love for him and her conviction that she had made the right choice. "Dear Father," she wrote, "I know it has been nearly a year since I left Hangtown, and I understand if you are still angry with me. But I wanted you to know that Mason and I are married and that we have had a son. We named him Joseph, after you, because despite everything, you are still my father and I still love you. I hope that someday you might find it in your heart to forgive me and to meet your grandson. Mason is a good man and a good husband. He treats me with love and respect, and he works hard to provide for our family. I know he is not what you would have chosen for me, but he is what I chose, and I have never regretted it. I pray for you every day, and I hope you are well. If you ever wish to contact me, we are living in Sacramento. Your loving daughter, Hannah. She sent the letter to the church in Hangtown and then waited, hoping for a response. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, but no reply came. Hannah tried not to let it hurt, tried to focus on the family she had made rather than the one she had left behind, but sometimes late at night, she would cry for the relationship she had lost. Mason held her during those moments, offering silent comfort. "Give him time," he would say. Forgiveness is not always easy, especially for people who hold themselves to such high standards. But love has a way of breaking through even the strongest walls. As Joseph grew from an infant into a chubby, laughing baby, Hannah found joy in motherhood that she had not anticipated. Every milestone, from his first smile to his first word, filled her with wonder. She and Mason were building something beautiful together, a family grounded in love and mutual respect. Mason's business grew as word of his skills spread. He began to hire other workers, building a small carpentry business that allowed them to move into a proper house with a yard where Joseph could play. It was modest compared to some of the grand homes springing up in Sacramento, but to Hannah, it was a palace. One evening in the fall of 1875, when Joseph was 18 months old, there was a knock at their door. Hannah answered it to find an older man standing on the porch, his face weathered and his eyes uncertain. "Father," the word came out as barely a whisper. Joseph Zimmerman looked older than she remembered, his hair more gray, new lines etched into his face. But his eyes, those sharp gray eyes, were the same. "Hello, Hannah," he said, his voice rough. "I hope I am not intruding. I have been in Sacramento for 2 days trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. You are not intruding. Please come in." She led him into the parlor, her hands shaking as she offered him tea. Mason appeared in the doorway, Joseph in his arms. Father and son-in-law eyed each other warily. "Reverend Zimmerman," Mason said, inclining his head respectfully, "it is good to see you, Mr. Wells." The Reverend's tone was stiff but not hostile. "Or should I say son-in-law? You can call me Mason, sir." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then Joseph, oblivious to the adult tensions, reached out toward his grandfather with a gurgling laugh. "And this must be young Joseph," the Reverend said, his voice softening. "May I?" Mason placed the baby in his grandfather's arms, and Hannah watched as her father's face transformed. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked down at the child. "He has your mother's eyes," he said to Hannah. "The same blue. I never thought I would see that color again. Father, why are you here?" Hannah asked gently. He looked up at her, and she saw the struggle in his expression. "Because I have been a stubborn, prideful fool. Because I let my anger and my wounded pride keep me from my only daughter and my only grandchild. Because I realized that I was in danger of making the same mistake my own father made with me." "What do you mean?" "My father disowned me when I told him I wanted to become a minister instead of taking over his business. He said I was wasting my life, throwing away every opportunity he had worked to give me. I left anyway, and he never forgave me. He died 5 years later without ever speaking to me again. I swore I would never be like him, and yet when you chose a different path than the one I wanted for you, I did exactly the same thing." The Reverend's voice broke, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "I received your letter, Hannah. I must have read it 100 times. And every time I read it, I heard your mother's voice in my head, telling me I was being a fool. She would have been ashamed of me for letting you go without a fight, for not accepting your choice even if I did not agree with it. "Father, I am sorry if I hurt you," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted that. I just needed to live my own life. I know that now, and I see that you have built a good life. This house, this child, the way you and your husband look at each other, it is what your mother and I had. I was so focused on protecting you that I did not see you did not need protection. You needed the freedom to choose your own path, even if it was not the one I would have chosen." He turned to Mason, who had been standing quietly by the window. "Mr. Wells, Mason, I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing you, condemned you for crimes you were cleared of, and considered you unworthy of my daughter. I was wrong." Any man who could inspire such loyalty and love in Hannah, who could face his fears and clear his name, who could build a life and a family from almost nothing, that is a man of character. I would be honored if you would forgive my prejudice and allow me to be a part of this family. Mason crossed the room and extended his hand. "There is nothing to forgive, sir. You were protecting your daughter. I respect that. And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." The two men shook hands, and Hannah felt a weight she had been carrying for 2 years finally lift from her shoulders. Her father stayed for a week, getting to know his grandson and son-in-law. On the last evening of his visit, he and Hannah sat together on the porch while Mason put Joseph to bed. "You were right," he said quietly. "That day when you said you needed to find out who you were when you were not trying to be the perfect preacher's daughter. I did not understand then, but I do now. You are stronger and braver than I ever gave you credit for." "Mother gave me that strength," Hannah replied. "She showed me what it meant to follow your heart even when it is difficult." "She did she not?" Her father smiled, a sad, wistful expression. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. When she agreed to come west with me, everyone told her she was mad. A genteel Philadelphia lady going to a rough gold mining town. They said she would not last a month, but she did not just survive, she thrived. She threw herself into the work, into the community, into our life together. And she did it all with grace and joy. I wish she could have met Mason. I think she would have liked him. In fact, I suspect she would have seen what I could not, that he was exactly what you needed, someone who would love you for yourself, not for who he wanted you to be." Before he left to return to Hangtown, the Reverend blessed little Joseph and gave Hannah and Mason his full approval and blessing on their marriage. "Write to me," he urged. "Tell me about Joseph's milestones, about your lives. I want to be part of this family if you will let me." "Of course, Father. You were always part of it. We just needed time to find our way back to each other." Over the next few years, the breach slowly healed. The Reverend visited twice a year, and Hannah and Mason made the trip to Hangtown once, though it was strange for Hannah to return as a visitor rather than a resident. Some of the townspeople were kind, but others clearly remembered the scandal of the preacher's daughter running off with the wanted man. Hannah found she did not care much what they thought anymore. In 1877, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called William. Mason's business continued to grow, and they eventually built a larger house with room for their expanding family. One evening in the summer of 1880, Hannah and Mason sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Joseph, now 6, was teaching Elizabeth to climb the old oak tree while baby William toddled after them on uncertain legs. "Are you happy?" Mason asked, taking her hand. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Hannah replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if I had stayed in Hangtown, if I had married Albert Henderson like my father wanted. It would have been safe and respectable and utterly empty. You gave me so much more than that." "You gave me everything," Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, running from my past, from my pain, from any kind of real connection. You changed all that. You made me want to be better, to stop running, to build something real. You brought light to my life, Hannah, when I had been walking in darkness for so long." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever regret it? The hard times, the struggle, the way we had to fight for everything?" "Not for a second. Those hard times made us who we are. They taught us what we are capable of, and they gave us this." He gestured to their children, their home, the life they had built together. "I would go through it all again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up here with you." Little Joseph came running over, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, come see." Beth climbed all the way to the third branch. They followed their son to the tree, where Elizabeth perched triumphantly among the leaves, waving down at them. "Look how high I am." "Be careful, sweetheart," Hannah called up, her heart in her throat even as she was proud of her daughter's bravery. "She is all right," Mason said, squeezing Hannah's hand. "She is strong and sure of herself, just like her mother." That night, after the children were in bed, Mason and Hannah lay together in the darkness, talking as they always did. They spoke of their hopes for the children, of plans for the business, of small dreams and large ones. "I want to buy land outside the city," Mason said. "Maybe start a ranch, have room for the children to really run and play. What do you think?" "I think it sounds wonderful. I grew up in a small town and I always loved having space and freedom. I want that for our children too. Then we will make it happen. Whatever it takes, we will build the life we want." In 1882, they did exactly that, purchasing 100 acres outside Sacramento. Mason built a beautiful house with his own hands, with high ceilings and large windows that let in abundant light. There was room for the children to explore, for Hannah to have a garden, for them to raise horses and cattle. Hannah's father visited for the house blessing, now in his 60s but still strong and vital. He stood with Mason on the porch, looking out over the land, and said, "You have done well for yourself, son. More importantly, you have made my daughter happy. That is all a father can hope for." "I have tried, sir, though I think she is the one who has done the real work. She took a chance on a wandering cowboy with nothing to his name. She believed in me when no one else did. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to her." "Love like that is rare," the Reverend said. "Treasure it, fight for it, never take it for granted." "I never will." The Reverend passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1885. Hannah grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing they had reconciled, that he had gotten to know his grandchildren, and had given his blessing to her marriage. At his funeral in Hangtown, she stood beside Mason and felt grateful for the journey that had brought her to this point. As the years passed, the Wells family became a fixture in their community. Mason's reputation as an honest businessman and skilled carpenter grew, and Hannah was known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. She never forgot what it was like to struggle, and she made sure to extend help to others facing hard times. Joseph grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's skill with tools and building. Elizabeth was spirited and independent, determined to prove she could do anything her brothers could do. William, the youngest, had his mother's gentle heart and his grandfather's way with words. In 1890, Joseph married a young woman named Sarah, and the following year they welcomed Mason and Hannah's first grandchild, a baby girl they named Hannah after her grandmother. Holding that tiny baby, seeing the next generation of the family she and Mason had created, Hannah felt a profound sense of completion. One evening in early autumn of 1893, 20 years after that fateful day when Mason had ridden into Hangtown, Hannah and Mason celebrated their anniversary. Their children had prepared a dinner, and friends from miles around had come to help them celebrate. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Mason led Hannah out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet darkness. 20 years, Mason said, pulling her close. 20 years since I married the bravest woman I have ever known. 20 years since I married a wandering cowboy and scandalized my whole town, Hannah replied with a smile. Best decision I ever made. Do you ever think about what might have been if I had just kept riding past Hangtown that day? If you had never brought me lunch that first day I worked on the church? If you had chosen the safe path? I try not to. Those alternate paths feel like different lives, lives that belong to different people. The Hannah who might have married Albert Henderson and lived a quiet, respectable life in Hangtown, she was not really me. She was who everyone thought I should be. You helped me find who I actually am. And who is that? A woman who is not afraid to fight for what she wants. A woman who can survive hard times and appreciate good ones. A mother, a wife, a partner, someone who is strong enough to make her own choices and brave enough to live with the consequences. She turned to look at him, taking in the lines time had etched into his handsome face, the gray now threading through his dark hair. You brought light to my life, Mason. You made me believe I could be more than what everyone expected. You gave me permission to want more, to reach for more, to be more. You did all that yourself, he replied, touching her face gently. I just loved you. That was the easy part. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of their land, feeling the weight of the life they had built together. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, could see the warm glow of lamplight through the windows. This was home. This was family. This was what they had fought for, worked for, sacrificed for. And it had been worth every single moment. As the months and years continued to unfold, Mason and his sons expanded the carpentry business, now employing a dozen men and taking on larger projects throughout the Sacramento region. Elizabeth surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school on their property for the children of local families who lived too far from town to attend regular school. Hannah threw herself into charitable work, helping to establish a fund for widows and orphans in their community. She never forgot what it was like to be young and scared, facing an uncertain future with little money and few prospects. She made it her mission to help other women in similar situations find their footing. In 1895, Elizabeth married a young lawyer from Sacramento, and they settled in a house Mason built for them on the edge of the property. William, at 16, announced his intention to become a minister like his grandfather, a declaration that brought tears to Hannah's eyes. The circle was completing itself in unexpected ways. Mason and Hannah settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle age. They had earned their gray hairs, their laugh lines, their comfortable silences. They no longer needed words to communicate, could read each other with a glance, finish each other's sentences without thought. On their 30th anniversary in 1903, their children threw them a grand celebration. Friends, family, and acquaintances came from miles around to honor the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. As Hannah looked around at the gathering, at the children and grandchildren, at the prosperous ranch and successful business, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, alone again on their porch, Mason took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about that scared girl who climbed out her window in the middle of the night to run away with a wanted man." She had no idea what she was getting into, no idea if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision, but she took the leap anyway. Do you think she would be proud of where she ended up? I think she would be amazed. Not just by the material success, though that is nice, but by the love, by the family, by the knowledge that she made the right choice even when everyone told her she was wrong. I love you, Hannah Wells. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if God grants us the time. I love you too. You are still the light in my darkness, the reason I am glad I took that leap into the unknown. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren, seeing the legacy they had built extend into the future. Mason remained strong and vital well into his 70s, still overseeing the business even as his sons took on more of the day-to-day operations. Hannah, surrounded by family and purpose, found that the faith she had questioned as a young woman had grown deeper and more nuanced over the years. It was no longer the rigid, rule-bound faith of her childhood, but something more expansive, more generous, more focused on love than judgment. One summer evening in 1910, when they were both in their mid-70s, Mason and Hannah sat once again on their porch, watching the sunset. Mason had been moving more slowly lately, complaining of pains in his chest, but he brushed off Hannah's concerns. "I am just getting old," he insisted. "It happens to all of us." But that night, as they prepared for bed, he suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Hannah caught him as he fell, easing him onto the bed, her heart pounding with fear. "Mason, Mason, stay with me. I will get the doctor." But he caught her hand, holding it tight. "No time for that. Hannah, listen to me. These have been the best 37 years of my life. Every day with you has been a gift. Promise me you will not grieve too long. Promise me you will remember the joy, not the pain of losing me. Do not talk like that. You are going to be fine. You have to be fine. I need you. You are the strongest person I know. You will be all right. Our children will take care of you." His breathing was labored now, his face pale. "Hannah, that day I rode into Hangtown, I did not know I was riding toward my salvation. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of drift. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." Tears streamed down Hannah's face. "You gave me everything too. You brought light to my life when I did not even know I was living in darkness. You showed me what it meant to be brave, to choose my own path, to live authentically. I cannot do this without you." "Yes, you can. You are Hannah Wells, the woman who climbed out a window in the middle of the night to chase her destiny. You are the woman who worked herself to the bone to pay for a lawyer for a man everyone else had written off. You are the woman who built a family, a business, a legacy out of nothing but love and determination. You do not need me to be strong. You never did. But I want you," she sobbed. "I choose you every day forever." He smiled, that beautiful smile that had captured her heart 37 years earlier. "And I choose you. In this life and whatever comes after. Wait for me, Hannah. I will find you again, I promise." His eyes closed, his breathing stopped, and Mason Wells slipped away peacefully in the arms of the woman who had loved him through everything. The grief was overwhelming. Hannah had faced many challenges in her life, but losing Mason was the hardest thing she had ever endured. For weeks, she moved through her days in a fog, going through the motions but feeling only emptiness. Her children surrounded her with love and support. They reminded her of all the years of happiness she and Mason had shared, of the family they had built, of the legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. Slowly, painfully, Hannah began to heal. She threw herself into her charitable work, into spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, into preserving the stories of her life with Mason so that future generations would know the love story that had started it all. On warm summer evenings, she would sit on the porch alone, talking to Mason as if he were still there beside her. She told him about the children's accomplishments, about the new babies being born, about the ways the world was changing. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, she could almost feel his presence, could almost hear his voice on the wind. Hannah lived for another 8 years after Mason's death. She remained sharp and active well into her 80s, a beloved matriarch who commanded respect and love from everyone who knew her. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1918, surrounded by 3 generations of family, her last words were, "I am coming, Mason. I kept you waiting long enough." They buried her beside Mason on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. At the funeral, her grandson Joseph, now a man of 50 with his own grandchildren, spoke about the legacy his grandparents had left. "My grandmother used to tell me about the day my grandfather rode into Hangtown," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She said that moment changed the entire course of her life. She left behind everything she knew, everything safe and familiar, to follow her heart. And in doing so, she created all of this. He gestured to the assembled crowd, to the prosperous ranch, to the thriving family. "She taught us that love is worth fighting for, that courage means making hard choices, and that a life lived authentically is worth more than a life lived safely. She and my grandfather built something beautiful together, and that beauty lives on in all of us." Years later, when the family history was being recorded for posterity, someone found a letter tucked into Hannah's Bible, written in her distinctive handwriting. It was dated just a few weeks before her death. "To my children, grandchildren, and all who come after," it read. "I want you to know that I lived a remarkable life, not because anything extraordinary happened to me, but because I chose to embrace the extraordinary when it appeared. When a wandering cowboy rode into town, I could have looked away. When he offered me a different life, I could have chosen safety. When the path got hard, I could have given up, but I did not. I chose love over security, adventure over comfort, authenticity over approval. And I never, not for one single moment, regretted those choices. Your grandfather brought light to my life when I did not even know I was living in darkness. He showed me what it meant to truly live, not just exist. He gave me the courage to be myself, to make my own choices, to build my own destiny. That is my legacy to you, the courage to choose your own path, even when everyone tells you are wrong. The bravery to love deeply, even knowing you might lose. The strength to stand up for what you believe in, even when it costs you everything. Live boldly, love fiercely. And never, ever settle for less than the life you dream of. With all my love, Hannah Zimmerman Wells." The letter was framed and hung in the main house, where it remained for generations. A testament to a love story that had started with a wandering cowboy riding into town, and a preacher's daughter brave enough to believe in something more than the life everyone expected her to lead. And so the story of Mason and Hannah Wells lived on, passed down through the generations, inspiring others to take leaps of faith, to choose love over fear, to believe that sometimes the most important thing you can do is follow your heart, even when the path is uncertain. Their ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, and their descendants went on to live remarkable lives of their own, each one carrying a piece of that original courage and love that had started it all. In the end, theirs was a simple story. 2 people who found each other against the odds, who chose each other despite the obstacles, who built a life together based on love, respect, and mutual support. It was a story about bravery and sacrifice, about forgiveness and redemption, about the power of love to transform lives and create legacies. It was a story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest choices, that courage is rewarded, and that a life lived authentically, with love as its foundation, is the richest life of all. Mason Wells had brought light to Hannah Zimmerman's life, and together they had created a beacon that continued to shine for generations to come, illuminating the path for others who dared to follow their hearts into unknown territory, trusting that love would light the way.